All right, well, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. Hope you've had a good day, good week so far. Thank you very much for joining us for what is the final Strategy and Resources Policy Committee meeting of this municipal year. Let me just say at the outset, thank you all for your work on this committee. It is a pleasure working with you all, and I'm very grateful to be working together with such a great group of colleagues. As always, the meeting's open to the public. We've got a number of people joining us today. Welcome. There's no items that contain exempt information. As always, the meeting's being webcast and will be recorded for the council website. There were 2 remit public questions and 1 supplementary question. Details have been sent. The questioners are not joining us today in person, but I'll refer to that when we get to public questions. If people could just switch their phones to silent, no fire test plans, and we'll go around and ask everyone to introduce themselves for the public record, please. So I'm Tom Hunt, I'm the leader of the council and I'm chair of the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee. And as always, I will start on my left-hand side.
Councillor Angela Argenti, member for Broomhill and Charleville and chair of Adult Health and Social Care Policy Committee.
Thanks. Douglas Johnson, councillor for City Ward and chair of Housing.
Councillor Zahira Naz, councillor for the Dana Ward and chair of the Finance Committee.
Good afternoon, Abdul Qayyum, councillor for Firth Park and co-chair of the Licensing Subcommittee.
Thank you. Councillor Dawn Dale, Chair of Education, Children and Families Policy Committee and member for Shire Green and Brightside.
Fran Melvin, Councillor for Firth Park Ward and Deputy Chair of the Committee.
Ben Miskell, Chair of Transport, Regeneration and Climate and a Councillor in Park Harbour Ward.
Jonathan, chair of Environmental Services and Regulation and councillor for Dawn.
Good afternoon, Councillor Curtis Crossthorne. I am a member for Bayton Ward and chair of the Communities, Parks and Leisure Committee.
Hi, Councillor Martin Smith, Dawn Totley.
Good afternoon, Councillor Mohammed Maroof, Councillor for Grace Park Ward and chair of Economic Development, Skills and Culture Policy Committee.
Good afternoon, my name's Diane Hurst. I'm an elected member for Richmond Ward.
Thank you very much, everybody. And if I could ask the officers to also introduce themselves again, starting from the left-hand side with Jonathan, please.
Thank you. I'm Jonathan Clifton, Director of Strategy and Communications.
Hello, Meredith Teasdale. I'm Strategic Director for Children.
Mike Jackson, Chief Operating Officer.
Kate Josephs, Chief Executive.
David Hollis, General Counsel.
Joanne Cooper, Democratic Services.
Philip Gregory, Director of Finance.
Kate Martin, Exec Director, City Futures.
Matt Bamshire, Director of Adult Social Care and Wellbeing.
Thank you very much, everybody. So, no apologies have been received for today's meetings. We have a full house of committee members. Item 2, there's no items that contain any exempt information. Item 3, declarations of interest. Does any member have an interest in any of the items of business on the agenda? Councillor Maroof.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to say that when we get onto the annual equality report, there is going to be reference to the race equality report, and I was a race equality commissioner on that report. And
as were other members of the committee. I think that's absolutely fine, but noted. Thank you. Okay. I don't think that's absolutely fine. We can come to that later on. Is there anyone else who wants to declare any interests? No. Okay, thank you very much. Item number 4, minutes of the previous meeting. This was the meeting held last month, 23rd of February. Are members happy to approve them as a correct record of our meeting? Approved. Thank you very much. Item 5, public petitions, questions and statements. There were 2 remit questions and agenda questions. The responses have been sent to the questioner. 1 supplementary question was received. The questioner wasn't able to be here today, so that will be provided to them in writing immediately after this meeting. Item number 6, member questions. None have been received today. Item number 7 is our work programme. And for this, I will ask Joanne to briefly provide us with an update on the work programme, but I will just note that, as was highlighted, I think, at our last meeting, we have scheduled a meeting of this committee on the 15th of April. There are no items of business that have been put forward for that meeting, so we're proposing to take that meeting out of your diaries. So those cancellations will come through for the 15th of April. But on the remaining parts of the work programme, Joanne.
Thank you, Chair. Then we've had the translation and interpretation services procurement proposal, which has been added to the June meeting of the new municipal year, and an annual update has been added in February 27 for the crisis resilience, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Are members happy to approve the work programme as a correct record, noting that it is indeed at the end of the municipal year and it will start to get populated again as we go past the local elections. Are members happy to approve that? Great, thank you very much. Right, item number 8 is the Council's Annual Equality Report 2025. And for this item, we are joined by a number of officers who are going to present. Thank you all for being here. If I could ask you please to briefly introduce yourselves and then introduce the report, please. Thank you.
Adele Robinson, Equalities and Engagement Manager.
I'm Jonathan Clifton, Director of Strategy and Communications.
Jane English, Director of People and Organisational Culture.
Thank you very much. So we're here today to present the City Council's Annual Equality Report for 2025. Before we get into the detail of the report, I thought the best place to start was the Sheffield City Goals. As you know, these were created with input from thousands of residents and community groups to set a vision for the city. And one of the themes that runs throughout those goals is that everyone should share equitably in the city's success. And I think that's an ambition that then also runs throughout the council plan and throughout the council's own specific equalities objectives, which are listed in this report. And the report in front of you today sets out the work that the council has done in 2025 to try and move us closer to that vision. It's split into two broad sections. So the first section is around the work that the council's done to promote equality through the city, so through our services, our work with communities, and I'll talk briefly about that. The second section of the report and some of the annexes talks about how we promote equality as an employer for the council's own workforce, and Jane will cover that, and then we'll open for questions. So in terms of the work that the council's done to promote equality across the city, you'll see there's around 20 pages of examples and programmes of our work, so don't worry, I'm not going to run through all of them, but I'll just call out sort of 5 things. So first, there's a really big focus on children and young people, I think particularly in the area of racial inequality. You'll see we've worked with Learn Sheffield to roll out our racial literacy in schools programme. In social work, there's been a very big focus on anti-racist practice, and in fact some of our staff recently took part in a podcast on that. And we've worked hard to increase the diversity of our workforce, particularly work in residential care. So big focus on children and young people. The second theme is around the way we engage and support community organisations. So our community strategy was obviously a really important moment last year, but in keeping with that, you'll see the theme that runs throughout this is that it's often community organisations in the VCSFE sector that can have the biggest impact. And our report includes lots of examples of how we're using our data to target funding towards organisations serving the most disadvantaged groups and places in the city, whether that's how we distribute our People Keeping Well grant funding, whether that's the 2.2 million announced to support VCSFE that will come on stream next year, or whether that's using data to identify target groups in services such as the Household Support Fund or adult mental health. There's lots of examples in the report. The third theme is around employment support and business. So we've been using our power as a big purchaser of services to support local businesses, many of whom are smaller or run by people from different backgrounds and protected characteristics. So the number of local tender awards increased from 19% to 61% in the last 4 years. The work of the Diverse Business Advisory Board has gone from strength to strength. The See It, Be It campaign helping young people in careers, and lots of our own targeted employment support programs targeted to clients with autism, mental health disabilities. Fourth, I just want to touch on culture and events. We know we're conscious we play an important leadership role in the city, and we use that to promote awareness days and bring people together, whether that's established celebrations such as the work we did around Windrush Day or supporting Kelham Pride, whether it's lighting the menorah in the Peace Gardens at Hanukkah, but also for more bespoke events such as the event that was organised in the Peace Gardens to promote unity across South Yorkshire in the wake of rising racism. And fifth and finally, I'll just touch on our work on partnerships, which I think is another theme that runs throughout the report. So we are aware that promoting equality and tackling inequality is not something we can do on our own. We have to work in partnership with other organisations in the city. In 2025, we signed our new Faith Charter, recognising the important role that faith organisations play in the city. And perhaps the best example of our partnership working actually happened this week on Monday, when we joined the Race Equality Partnership for Sheffield, of whom we're a really proud member, to take stock of progress the city has made in tackling racial injustice, but also to reflect honestly about the challenges ahead. So I think it's fair to say there's been good progress in many areas, but we know that inequalities can be deep-seated, and the report does also highlight some of the challenges and therefore our priorities for the year ahead. So just to call three of those out, one big priority in the report is around improving our reporting on data and outcomes. We don't think we're strong enough on that yet as a council in terms of showing the impact on outcomes of some of our activity, and you'll see our proposal that is already beginning to feed through, but for different committees of the council to get more granular reporting on outcomes by protected characteristic. Second, you'll see references to doing more targeted action in certain areas where we need to do more work. Violence against women and girls, sadly, is still a really big challenge across the city, so a lot of work planned for the year ahead around re-accreditation of the White Ribbon campaign and services to try and tackle that. Exclusions, particularly among certain ethnic groups in schools, and our performance on SEND, just to give a few examples. And final big priority for the year ahead is around community cohesion. We know we need to play an important role in that, and so the commitment to a campaign to bring different groups across the city together under the banner of One Sheffield, Many Communities, and to prepare for celebrating Sheffield's City of Sanctuary 20th anniversary would be a big focus for the year ahead as well. So I'll pause there and hand to Jane to talk more about our role as an employer.
Thank you. So I'm going to give you a summary of our workforce data report. So we continue to make measurable progress in building a diverse and inclusive workforce with improvements across recruitment, representation and employee engagement. The council's workforce stood at 8,568, reflecting modest growth and sustained recruitment activity, particularly among younger and more diverse cohorts. Declaration rates across protected characteristics are high, giving us confidence in the robustness of the data used to make informed decision-making. The representation of global majority, disabled employees, unpaid carers and LGBTQ+ colleagues has increased or remains strong across much of the organisation. Recruitment outcomes are particularly positive, with global majority appointments exceeding local population benchmarks and disabled candidates achieving strong appointment rates through inclusive recruitment practices. These trends demonstrate the effectiveness of anonymised recruitment, guaranteed interview schemes and flexible working arrangements. However, progression into senior roles remains uneven. Whilst there has been recent improvements in chief officer diversity, representation at senior grades continues to lag behind both workforce and city demographics, particularly for global majority, disabled and LGBTQ+ employees. This highlights the need for sustained focus on talent pipelines, development opportunities and leadership accountability to ensure diversity at entry level translates into leadership representation. We are introducing an organisational development team, and they will support the council addressing these challenges. The council has also seen an increase in employer and employee-led casework, though overall volumes remain low relative to the workforce size. Emerging trends suggest the importance of monitoring employee experience, particularly for groups who are disproportionately represented in casework. This has now received sustained focus under new leadership and through the new people strategy, and a review of our HR policies is underway in consultation with our trade unions. We are also introducing a new case management system to give greater visibility of progress, and we are bolstering our HR resource in this area and have proposals for how the organisation undertakes investigations. Looking ahead, delivery of the Council's first people strategy provides a clear framework to address these challenges. Through strengthening leadership, inclusive workforce practices and targeted interventions, the Council aims to embed fairness, improve progression outcomes and ensure Sheffield City Council remains a modern, inclusive employer that reflects and serves its communities effectively. For the first time, we are reporting on gender, disability and ethnicity pay gaps, and we are working with core city colleagues to benchmark our data. The gender pay gap report shows a small and mixed picture. Women earn 1.84% more on average than men, reflecting stronger female representative in higher paid roles. The report highlights progress through the Sheffield Role Review Programme and inclusive recruitment and flexible working practices, whilst acknowledging that further work is needed to address the widening gaps at the pay midpoint. The disability pay gap shows that employees who have declared a disability earn on average 3.13% less per hour than non-disabled employees. The report highlights that disabled employees are overrepresented in lower paid roles and underrepresented in the highest pay quartile, which contributes to the gap. The ethnicity pay gap shows that global majority employees earn on average 4.05% less than their white British employees and are overrepresented in lower pay quartiles and underrepresented in the highest paid roles. Whilst applications from global majority candidates have increased significantly, progression into higher paid roles has not kept pace. All three reports have highlighted the need for continued action on job evaluation, recruitment, progression and workforce data to improve equity and representation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for giving us that really excellent summary of the report. So now we'll open up for questions, for feedback for members to come in. I've got Councillor Maroof and then I'll come across to this side, but Councillor Maroof.
Thank you so much, Chair. May I begin by saying it's an excellent report, this. It's the best I've seen. I've been involved with seeing such reports for the last 20 or 30 years with this local authority. So the data that we've got is absolutely excellent. So yeah, I give you credit for the report that you've done here. It's brilliant. But it's what we actually do with the data that's quite important, because we've seen many reports over a number of years saying that this is where our weaknesses lie. So I would like you to sort of comment on what we're likely to do to bridge that this time. What's going to be different this time that wasn't there before? Because it's always raised as an issue, but it never seems to get across the line in terms of actions. So that's one point. The second point is around employment in the City Council itself. It's quite difficult to look at the numbers and see very little progress has actually been made around the global majority, which still seems to be around grades 1 to 9. Almost 90% of them are on that sort of grade. Again, there's been very little movement on that. And I'm just being devil's advocate here, so don't shoot me down on this one. But there is sometimes a perception that there is a glass ceiling that operates within local authorities and sometimes other wider bodies. It's very hard to get rid of that myth because the numbers keep suggesting the same thing time and time again. So what is going to be different this time to address that? Thank you, Chair.
Let's take a few more questions and I'll come back to the colleagues to respond. I've got Councillor Argencio, Councillor Belbin, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Smith. I've got 4 and then Councillor Naz. So I've got 6. Councillor Argencio.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the report. And likewise, I think it's such a comprehensive report. It's really good to see the data on our own staff, and it is the best that I've seen, so far in this role. There are lots of excellent things. I think one thing that I would like to see, and I know that this is a report back of how, we're doing the good thing about, but for me is what the challenges are to kind of, do better and address some of the, issues that we can see from the data. I agree that is how we use the data that is important. I know that we're doing a lot of work on this. I just wanted to pick up on the sensory impairment thing, which is one area that I am particularly interested in. And yes, we did establish the sensory board. I kind of supported with that, as in I championed that to make it happen, but other people did all the work. There was a meeting last week of the sensory board, so it was the annual meeting. And I was wondering, I just want to make people aware that some of the stuff that was discussed there, so yes, that has happened, but then in practice, this is what's happening. So there is a government green paper pathway to work that could have an impact on, on people's access to work scheme. So there have been cuts to deaf people, access to work grants, affecting their ability to pay. I'm reading from the minutes, yeah? Their ability to pay support at work. This means like BSL interpreter. Some deaf professionals have had their grants cut by 50%. So are we addressing what impact this will have on our own employees, because we do have deaf employees, and how that is going to affect them to be able to work and to have a decent to make a decent living. So it's the stories. Is actually the data is fantastic. I love data, I love numbers, I love graphs and all of that, but actually it's the stories that the data tell that is important. Also on page 94, there's something about unpaid carers. And one statistic that we use a lot in social care is the fact that it takes 2 years for people to actually acknowledge that they are carers. So lots of the people who are carers are not going to declare that they're carers, not because they're not carers, but because they're not accepting themselves that they are. So that is also something that we need to, as an employer, we need to keep that in mind. So for me, the question is, how are we addressing the challenges? And yes, I'm super happy. And I think we've come a long way as a council in terms of how we are a lot more self-aware about, how we need to do better.
Thank you very much. Councillor Belvin, please.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with all the other comments about the presentation of the data. I think is really good and really helpful and clear. I was one of those who attended the Race Equality Partnership event on Monday, so I've been quite focused on the race equality side of the report, and I've got a couple of questions around that. I think firstly, we can't ignore the fact that the wider context here is an increase in racism in society, in terms of we know there is an increase in hate crime, etc. And we are seeing, frankly, quite divisive political parties out there who are pushing those kinds of messages. So I know this report is looking back, but could you say a little bit about how we're supporting our staff, for example, to ensure that mechanisms for reporting hate crime are there in the council? I think I've heard some things through our health and safety service, for example, about making reporting easier, and it'd be good to hear a bit more about that, because I think, sad to say, some people just take it as this isn't something worth reporting because it's getting so frequent, and we do need to make sure we are capturing what is happening in the outside world there, and possibly within this council as well. And again, if there's ways of capturing that for our service users as well. And secondly, I think one of the clear messages that was coming out of the race equality event on Monday was we know there is some good stuff happening. I think as others have said, we need to be clear about what we're aiming to do with the data we've got and be more purposeful with it so that we're setting targets and can be held accountable. And there is something as well about how we share this information. I know we've got a report here that is in the public domain, but you know, there's talking to the other anchor organisations in the city who are similarly trying to demonstrate the progress we are making as a city around race equality is really important if we're to be truly accountable for it. So I wondered if you could say something about what we're doing about sharing the information that we have, the information that partner organisations have, how we can be held accountable in that way, and about setting targets so that we can be really clear what we are aiming to do with this data.
Thank you very much. It's quite a lot in those first three, so I'm going to suggest I come back to have some responses, and then I've got 3 more people who've indicated that they want to come in.
Yeah, lots of really helpful questions. Quite a lot of them related to work, so I'll hand to Jane shortly to come through those. But just to pick up on your last questions, Councillor Belbin. So I completely agree that the feedback from the event on Monday around being clearer on our targets and how we engage people in that and hold ourselves to account is a big priority for the year ahead. I think actually Monday's event was in a sense the first step in doing that. So to have all the big organisations, the universities, police, health, the council at a public event with time for people to come and actually scrutinise, you know, look at our workforce data, speak to people at stalls to explain what we're doing and to provide us with feedback and ideas for more. I think that was an important first step in that. But I think for the year ahead, what I'm keen to do is actually to have a clearer action plan ourselves, both for ourselves and for the broader race equality partnership for Sheffield, so that we can have clearer public reporting on our proposed actions. I might just hand to Adele to pick up the question on service users, because I know you're doing some work on monitoring complaints and some of our customers and so on, and then maybe Jane will pick up quite a lot of the other stuff, workforce.
Yeah, similar to what we did last year is we did a deep dive into blue badges last year, and what we've been doing this year is a deep dive into customer complaints, and especially the pilot has been looking at disability and race. And the pilot has been reporting, and what we are now saying as a result of that, we actually need to extend it across more protected characteristics, because it is showing that there are issues there, and it's how it gets from, it's not necessarily about the complaint itself, which could be a very practical complaint. It's maybe about how the complaint is dealt with and how the people feel about that complaint. So we're doing more work with that with customer services, and we're going to continue to be doing that in the year and bring that back on a quarterly basis. But it is going through different committees looking at that. So it is something we've picked up in terms of complaints. And like Jonathan said, one of the big things for next year will be, we have met with all services across and looking at the council plan and looking at that equality lens across all of those measures, and that will be looking at things like ethnicity and disability across, say, things like key stage 4 indicators or housing satisfaction, and looking at that through what do different groups feel about the satisfaction rather than just the headline measure. So we're doing that across the board in the performance measures as well.
Thank you. From a workforce perspective, I think I would say there isn't an easy fix, and there's not a quick fix to this. And it's not one person, it's an organisational accountability for how we think about the focus and the relentless action we need to take to make sure we have an inclusive and equitable workforce. To give you some of the examples, some of the things we are doing, we do have to better represent our communities at our senior level, because we are not representative at that senior level at the moment. So we've supported a national development programme specifically for global majority employees to allow them to be able to step into senior and executive roles. We had 2 people on the programme last year, and we have 4 people, actually it starts today, on the programme this year to be able to support some of our kind of middle to senior global majority employees step into some of those executive roles. Inclusive leadership is absolutely being embedded into our leadership behaviours that we've just launched to our senior leaders in the organisation. Again, reinforcing the importance of equity and inclusion within our organisation. We're really enhancing the role of our employee hubs as well, and really opening them up wider to the organisation and publicising them more to the organisation in terms of the role that they can play in supporting people in the workplace. We do things such as unconscious bias training within our recruitment training. And also within our new people strategy, there is a specific resourcing section, and the new organisational development team is going to support the organisation for the first time to do strategic workforce reporting. We've never done that before, and that's a really key measure to think about actually how we can support better resourcing across the organisation. I'll come back to Councillor Belbin's point actually around kind of reporting hate crime. So we've never had a particularly strong reporting culture within the organisation from a health and safety perspective. So we are just in the process of about to launch a new online reporting tool for all of our employees. A few of the members may have seen it. It's very easy to actually use. You use a QR code or you can go online to be able to report any kind of incident, hate crime, a near miss, whatever it might be within the workplace. And there's a whole automated system that sits behind it that not only ensures that actions get followed up, but also can get reported within the organisation. And I think that's one of our key things, is actually been our lack of reporting sometimes. So for the first time, we've got a very easy to use, very accessible reporting system that all of our employees can use to report any hate crime.
Thank you all very much. Councillor Johnson, followed by Councillor Smith, Councillor Naz.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a few points to make on equality because it's something that interests me a lot. But first of all, yeah, thanks. It's actually really good to see all this put together in a compendium report because it is really important to have something out publicly that specifies what's actually improved to tackle inequality in the city. And it is important. This shows quite a wide range of things. I mean, I'm going to say that, just because things are good, it doesn't mean they're necessarily tackling equality, but actually having all these examples that at least have some bearing on equality and does show how the city is changing. The improvement journey, the council is undoubtedly improving, and here we've got lots of examples of specific ways in which the council is improving its services. But the council couldn't improve its services without tackling inequality, and that's a really important thing. So that's one thing why I think it is really important that we need to commend this report there. The other thing is that I think it's important, I'd like us to note that tackling inequality isn't just picking out a few things for a few people. You're not just looking at, sort of young carers in a particular part of the city where there's deprivation. If you improve equality for those people, you will improve equality for lots of other people too, and the ripples go out there. And an example I'm particularly pleased about in my area as Chair of Housing, I'm pleased that the council's recently appointed a new head of repairs and maintenance who is female, and that's important because that's a very male-dominated area of our workforce. It's important because the appointment of that will not just change the stats overall, but will bring benefits to, say, young white men working in that workforce because of what they see and the subtle changes to culture that will go on there. So I'm hopeful that it's those sort of things that can really make a difference right across the board, and we need to take account of those. There is a point on about just grappling with the really difficult stuff, because whilst we've got lots of examples where there have been improvements, we ought to acknowledge that there will be areas where the council hasn't made improvements and in some cases has made things worse over the course of the year. And that can be for all sorts of reasons. They're usually well-intentioned, but it can happen. So I suppose I want to ask what steps we might be able to take in future reports to look more critically at areas where we really haven't done very well, and we should examine those and just be honest about it. We can't pretend that we all get things right all the time. So we perhaps need to acknowledge those, because it's only when you acknowledge those and are honest about it that you can really get to grips with the difficult stuff. A lot of equality stuff is quite difficult. A lot's easy, and you can do it, and everyone benefits. A lot is difficult as well. And that's simply because inequality is deep-seated in the city. And just final point is something that is missing from there that I'd be particularly interested in, came in fairly late on in the season. Looking at the ethical procurement policy of the council, and it's something that I was particularly interested in. I was councillor now as it went through Finance Committee, and is something that the council has batted back and forth for a number of years without perhaps making so much progress. And adopting a new policy that was informed in particular by an equality-led approach there. So it was recognising how we can actually use an equality lens to improve the way that the council spends its money. And that's a big issue. Procurement's a big issue of the council. How it spends its money is a big issue. And looking through that, through the equality, and what that means for the people of the city. Councillor Naz, I'm sure, will back me up in saying that we had some really interesting discussions with officers in the procurement field who were perhaps grappling with this, possibly for the first time. And I'm not aware that there's any other local authority across the country that's actually taken that approach yet. So I think it's something that we should note and just take account of. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with a lot of the comments that have already gone before, so I'm not going to repeat them. Thank you very much for the report. Many of us, if not all of us, had I forget whether it was a letter or an email, from the independent Sheffield Race Equality Commission, which struck a different tone about things were getting worse, and that's a very simplified thing there. I'm just wondering if you could give us your thoughts and feedback on that as well, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Naz, please.
Thank you. I agree with a lot of comments that are made here by colleagues today. The report is really good. There's lots of positives in there. But also the report outlines activity and engagement with diverse communities. But can you explain what measurable improvements we have seen in outcomes for Black, Asian and minority ethnic residents in Sheffield over the last year? And which of these which areas of inequality remain the most significant? My second question is, where the People Data Report identifies disparities affecting Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, whether that's in employment or access to services or representation, what actions is the Council taking to address these structural inequalities, and how will progress be monitored? Is similar to what Councillor Balbin was saying, I guess, about having targets and being able to hold ourselves to account. So them are my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We come back to officers, come back to those points. And I think, Councillor Agencio, one of your questions you were saying you wanted further response on?
It's the one about the possible kind of effects on our employees for the access to work grant reduction, particularly for people with sensory impairment.
Okay, thank you.
Shall I come back now? Yep. Thank you. Yeah, lots of helpful questions. I'll draw a couple of them together because I think a key theme from two or three of the questions is around outcomes, and I think that's something, as I said in the presentation, as we do in the paper, I think that is an area that we're not strong enough on yet in terms of how we report on outcomes. So included with the papers for the report was our proposal to improve our reporting on outcomes for each committee, so of the council plan outcomes as we report back, and obviously it comes to Finance and Performance Committee in the round, to actually have performance by protected characteristic broken down. So we've already worked on the for children's and educational attainment on making sure that we start to present data by different groups so that we don't just look at aggregate attainment. And that does show some really interesting disparities. I don't have them all to hand. I can share them around. But for example, we know we have long-standing challenges on academic attainment, particularly for Roma, some black and white working class boys, but it does pretend there's a lot of intersectionality here, depends on gender, depends on other things, so it's quite a complicated story. But I think the theme that I think links together several of the questions is, can we be clear in our outcomes reporting? And our commitment is that each committee now will start seeing that data, and that will enable us to focus more on it. In terms of some of the sort of measurable, just sort of finish the sort of second part of your question, Councillor, in terms of the sort of what we're doing to try and tackle structural inequality. I think that's at the heart of quite a lot of the strategies and policies throughout the council, some of them of which are arrested in this report. So, for example, we know there is a really important challenge on maternal health and infant mortality for certain ethnic groups. That is a really important part of the council's infant mortality strategy, the work we're doing to target our services such as some of the sort of health visitors, where we target support to, and how we work with those communities. It includes things like what language we offer services in, and which organisations we fund to deliver them. So that's an example, I think, of one of the sort of big structural barriers. And this sort of, I guess I'm sort of linking together with Councillor Johnson as well, asking some of our big challenges. I think school exclusions, when you're talking, if we're sticking with the theme of race, I think it's a big focus for us. In areas to do with disability, I think we know from all the work and the reports that's come out on the performance of our SEND system, that's a really important challenge where outcomes aren't yet strong enough, and where we now have a board and an action plan working really closely on how we can improve outcomes for SEND people. So I think that's, to give an example of some of those sort of structural drivers and the importance of outcomes, I think they're some of the areas that we'll be focusing on a lot as a council. On the question on ethical procurement, strongly agree. I did mention that in my opening remarks. It probably doesn't come out strong enough in the text of the report, but I think you're absolutely right. I think the council is thinking quite hard about its role in terms of procurement. And we've organised, working with Diverse Business Advisory Board and Chambers of Commerce and others in the city, we organised a really important Meet the Buyer event where we had, I think it was around 200 local organisations come in to meet some of the big organisations in the city to understand what does it mean if you want to be a supplier to win contracts from the council, the universities, and so on. So I think that sort of work, I think, is really important in supporting local business, many of whom can also often be very diverse businesses themselves. So yeah, I think that's an important part of the story, and we'll try and make sure we tell that. I'll just pick up the question on the Independent Race Equality Commission. Yeah, we did see that that coverage and have spoken indeed to some of the people that sent that letter. I think it's worth saying that that was a letter sent by a small number of people that were involved in the original Race Equality Commission. I think there were around 24, 25 commissioners in total on the original Race Equality Commission. That letter was sent by a small subset of that original group. And actually at the Race Equality Partnership event that was held on Monday, many of the commissioners were there and talked openly and honestly about some of the points made in that letter. I think we'd absolutely acknowledge, both as a council but also our role on the Race Equality Partnership for Sheffield, that there is more work to do. And I think the tone of the event on Monday that brought, there were many community leaders, many of whom spoke on the panel very passionately, I think, about the progress that the city has made since the publication of the Race Equality Commission. Indeed, the Race Equality Commission report was the catalyst for creating the Race Equality Partnership for Sheffield. That work was so important for catalysing the work of reps. I think the event on Monday, people talk powerfully about the progress they've seen, but that we need to do more, and that there is more to do, and that when we stand and work together in partnership across the city, we can achieve. So there's lots of work, talk on Monday about some of the priorities, many of which have been mentioned today, on outcomes, on being able to communicate more clearly with communities, bringing communities together being an important part of the work. And of course, we're both as a council but also as the Race Equality Partnership for Sheffield, always keen to take on criticism and challenge and ideas for how we can improve. Was there anything you wanted to pick up?
Should I just pick up the question around access to work? So I know we have a number of employees who have long-standing support through access to work that actually allows them to remain in the workplace and be productive within the workplace. In our people strategy, one of our 3 work streams is Belong, Thrive and Succeed, and sitting under that at the moment is a reasonable adjustment task and finish group. So I will make sure that specifically I ask them to look at the implications of any changes to access to work to make sure it's fed into that work that they're doing.
Great, thank you very much. Look, I think the report does set out a lot of really positive work that the council's doing. Absolutely. I think we should all be impatient, wanting it to improve further. And I think, you know, take from the committee a commitment to the work that's going on here. But absolutely, on behalf of our communities, you know, we should be wanting to, with a fierce urgency, to bring about the change that hold too many people back, to remove the barriers that hold too many people back from fulfilling their own potential and realising their talent in this city that shows up in the data. And so I think you've got a cross-party, cross-committee commitment to work with you to make that happen. I think we should give some thought after the election to think about how we can better communicate the work we're doing. And I think One Sheffield Many Communities is a really positive step in that direction. And I know that that is now starting to be shared more widely, which is great to see. But I think at a point, as has been mentioned earlier on, when there is more emboldened racism in our society, it is more important than ever that we are true to the values that we hold in this council and set out what we believe in, and that we do believe that our diversity is our strength, and that as a city of many faiths, many communities, many backgrounds, we are stronger when we come together and stronger for that diversity. And I think it is important that we, you know, recommit, all of us, you know, to do whatever we can in whatever capacity we have as committee chairs, lead members, councillors, people in our parties, to recommit together to bring about all the change we need to see that's reflected in the data. The work that people have done to, you know, move us in the right direction on a number of key indicators is really, really welcome, and thank you to the team that you've been here today to present brilliantly and answer those questions, so thank you. There are a number of recommendations set out on page 39 for us to consider and note: the annual equality report, specifically the progress made in meeting our statutory equality duties, progress made in challenges against equality objectives, progress made in challenges in our people data report, the gender, race and disability pay gap information, and they are the recommendations before us. Are people happy to note them, to note the progress we've made? Great, thank you very much. Okay, item number 9 on our agenda is the Q3 budget monitoring report for financial year 25-26. And Philip Gregory, Director of Finance, is here to introduce the report. Philip, over to you.
Great, thank you, Chair. This report provides an update on the Council's overall financial position and the progress made throughout the year to the period that ends at the end of December last year. The forecast outturn is an overspend of £18.9 million, which is a reduction of £4.7 million during the quarter and a reduction of £9.3 million since the beginning of the year. The main driver for the reduction in forecast during this quarter was a result of reducing costs in special educational needs home-to-school transport. The Council set out a series of service-level programmes and organisation-wide financial measures to address the overspend and bring down the forecast position during this year. This included targeted interventions in adult social care, which is mainly through the Adult Social Care Improvement Board, which has been chaired by the Chief Executive. In children's services, where we've reviewed care placements, we've invested in in-house provision, and we've improved home to school transport. In housing, where we've reduced temporary accommodation costs by minimising bed and breakfast placements, and we've accelerated permanent housing transitions. In addition to these interventions, a number of other restrictions have been introduced from the 1st of September to control expenditure on recruitment and discretionary items. Our expectation was that these interventions would have a material impact on the scale of overspend during the year, and these have all contributed to the improved financial position that's presented this afternoon. We remain clear that the Future Sheffield Transformation Programme is the path to a financially sustainable future for the Council. In their report to the Audit and Standards Committee last week, our external auditors confirmed that they've reviewed the approach to Future Sheffield that we've taken as one part of their value for money assessment, and they found the approach to be robust. Appendix 1, from page 189 in your pack, sets out the overall position for the Council, as well as the specific budgets that this committee is responsible for. Those specific responsible budgets are forecasting an overspend of £400,000 from a budget of 19 million, which is a variance of 2.1%. The drivers and mitigations for those particular items are summarised on page 191. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions that the committee has.
Thank you very much, Philip. Any questions for Philip? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report, Philip. I'm just mindful that given world events, financial issues are in a bit of a turmoil. Have you got any indication as to what the potential higher inflation rate and higher fuel costs are going to have on council spend going forward? Thank you.
Councillor Johnson, please.
Thanks. Yeah, just a quick question about the commercial property, where it indicates there's an overspend there, which may be reduced income. What's happening with that? That's been a chronic issue, I think.
Okay, a couple of points. Let's come back to Philip on those.
Yeah, great. So, Councillor Smith, in terms of what is happening around the world, we're monitoring the cost of fuel on a daily basis. So our suppliers are doing the same. We have stocks of fuel that we can use for our own fleet. So again, we're maintaining those and making sure that they are adequate to meet our needs. We are monitoring the cost of that as we go through. We're also looking at costs that affect staff, for example, where they need to reclaim expenses. We will be like everybody else, watching to see whether those costs come down over the next few days and weeks. If they don't, then we've got contingency plans that we can enact in order to both mitigate the cost of that and then also work with partners to make sure that we can minimise the implications on the council.
Thank you.
And then in terms of the commercial property, Councillor Johnson's referred to, it remains a focus for the service in City Futures to continue to review that and look at what we can provide in that particular property. We are also using that for some of our own staffing requirements, where we can locate staff in there that it makes sense to do so. And again, where people are hosting people from across the city, it makes sense to be in that location. But it's on our watch list of things to keep focused on.
Okay, thank you. In which case, I don't see any other points people want to raise, in which case, let me turn to the recommendations. That this committee notes the updated information in the 25-26 revenue budget outturn as described in the report, and note the targeted actions and work underway to bring the in-year forecast overspend down. Are members happy to support those recommendations? Great. Thank you very much, Philip. Right, item number 10 is Neighbourhood Community Infrastructure Levy Review. So, Neighbourhood Sale Review. Page 193 in your packs, and we're joined by Tom Smith. Tom, for the benefit of people in the room and online, do you want to just introduce yourself and then introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Hi, everyone. I'm Tom Smith. I'm Director of Customer Experience and Communities at the Council. This is a report in terms of a review of community infrastructure levy that we've been undertaking, mainly focused on neighbourhood community infrastructure levy. I will now, from now on, I'll refer to it as SIL because it's very long. So SIL is it's a fixed charge on developments that comes to the council. It's effectively split into two pots, a strategic pot and a neighbourhood pot. We're allowed to allocate up to 15% of that overall pot to this neighbourhood pot. And in Sheffield, what we do is we take that 15% of overall SIL and we redistribute it across the wards based on deprivation indices. And that's in accordance with the Cabinet decision that was taken in 2018. What that effectively means is that neighbourhood SIL is linked to ward-based criteria. So the whole sort of definition as it stands means that any applications for use of that neighbourhood SIL needs to meet a ward priority. And what that means is that at the moment, that fund is not effectively able to support communities of interest or identity in the city in the same way that it supports communities of place, because often those organisations support across ward boundaries and across the city because they support particular type of community rather than geographical community. So this report is proposing to create a specific non-geographical fund for communities of interest and identity, and then go on to review governance and guidance related to SIL. Not to dwell too much on the detail, but just a few points to note, I guess. So in September last year, Council resolved to ask this committee to consider adding it to its work programme, exploring the use of strategic SIL to support community centres and communities of interest, as requested by the BEMA 5 groups and others. And then in October, this committee received the community strategy. And within that community strategy report, we both defined communities as being not just about place, as being about communities of interest and communities of identity. And that report also acknowledged that the limitations of the use of neighbourhood SIL because of that ward-based criteria, and asked us to come away and do some further work in terms of neighbourhood SIL. A couple of extra bits. So we're proposing to relook at the governance of neighbourhood SIL. We haven't looked at that since Cabinet in October 2018. There have been significant changes, obviously, in the council overall governance structure since then. We now have a committee system. We've got a different management structure, so that the officers to whom decisions are delegated have changed, albeit we've done that through the constitution, but we probably need to relook at it. And it's clear that some of that process is not always readily understood in terms of how it actually works practically day to day. So there's a genuine need to relook at the governance of neighbourhood SIL and more clearly set out what the role of elected members is and how they can influence those decisions. Alongside that, we need to do some work on the guidance. Through the review that we've undertaken, it's really clear that there's again, because that guidance hasn't been updated relatively recently, there's a bit of a lack of clarity as to what you can actually use neighbourhood SIL for. There's been very specific, almost assumption, I suppose, that it can only be used for infrastructure, and that is not the case for neighbourhood SIL. It can also be used for work to develop infrastructure, to look at feasibility, to bring in consultancy and other things that don't necessarily lead to a specific piece of capital infrastructure at the end of it. And then, as I say, because we've got this constraint at the moment, we have proposed creating a non-geographical fund. There's some other authorities that have done this, so Bristol in particular have done it, where they've top-sliced 15% of that neighbourhood SIL, so it's effectively 15% of 15%, just to confuse things even further. But what that means is they've taken that amount of money, and that can then be used across communities of interest and identity to support those sorts of organisations. In Sheffield, if we allocated effectively 12.5% neighbourhood SIL and then 2.5% into this non-geographical fund, that would yield, based on the historic current pot, around about £90,000 a year. But it would obviously reduce the amount of money available to wards proportionate to that amount, so it would reduce the amount within the wards as part and parcel of that proposal. So just in summary, what the report is talking about is seeking to top-slice neighbourhood SIL to create a fund specifically for organisations representing communities of interest or identity. Proposal at the moment is to allocate 2.5% of overall SIL income, to undertake a review of the governance, include any governance changes that we need to do, and make sure we're doing equality impact assessments to support all those decisions going forwards, to make sure we look at the guidance associated with those bids for SIL funding, including the types of activities the new fund could be used for. And that might be about things like potentially supporting, enabling, unlocking other funding, like Heritage Lottery Fund and other things, and updating that guidance to reflect city goals, council plan, our community strategy and other strategic objectives. In particular, outlining a kind of a risk assessment process to support bids that don't necessarily yield definitive outcomes, because again, one of the things that historically has been an issue is that some of the guidance has said unless you can show a very specific outcome from this funding, it cannot be used. That is not necessarily the case, but we need to risk assess outcomes and provide some guidance in that regard. And then obviously, alongside all of that, to update the guidance frequently asked questions on the development website, to publicise neighbourhood SIL, and in particular relating to neighbourhood plan areas, actually where there's been very few applications for funding historically, and we believe that's largely because people don't quite know how to access it actually at the moment. So just to go back then to the recommendations, so recommendations today are for committee to approve in principle creation of a non-geographical community infrastructure levy fund, specifically for delivering outcomes relating to communities of interest and or identity, likely to require the top slicing of the neighbourhood community infrastructure levy. Agree further work is required to design this fund to put the right governance arrangements and criteria in place. Ask that officers prepare further information to support decision at Strategy and Resources Committee as early as possible in the 26-27 municipal year. And note that the ongoing review of governance will include any changes required to support that, and that further report to committee will present the outcomes of that review, including where we need to make any changes to the constitution that would be recommended to full council. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. I think just to make sure everyone's aware, I think you will have seen, I think on your desks, a proposed amendment. I'm just going to come to Councillor Smith, because I'm aware it's come from the Lib Dem group. Do you want to let's just put the work.
So I've not given everybody a card, I didn't bring enough copies for everybody, but you've had it, and each group has had it.
Right, well, in order then to make sure everyone is really clear about what is being put forward, Councillor Smith, as leader of the Lib Dem group, can I come to you to just explain what you're proposing?
Thank you, Chair. I was going to explain this when we get to the comments, but there's a lot that we agree with in this report. A lot of good work's gone into it, but it's the very last few words in item 10, likely to require the top slicing of neighbourhood community infrastructure levy. Our amendment would keep the rest, but delete that subclause. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So yeah, all of this is item 10, so it's just to take off, you're proposing the final words of recommendation A. Okay. So, a number of people have indicated who wanted to come in. First, I think it was Councillor Argentio, but I've also got Councillor Crosthorne, Councillor Naz, Councillor Belbin, Councillor Miskell, Councillor Hurst. If people can be brief. I heard a comment under someone's breath about the length of an earlier question. I won't say who it was. Well, I mean, go ahead, Councillor Argentio, please. But if people can be brief, because we do want to make sure everyone has time to speak on this. So, Councillor Argentio.
Yeah, I said that Councillor Johnson was long-winded, so I was criticising my own.
Yes.
So, first of all, I want to give a huge kind of thank you to staff, particularly Tom, for being so patient about this. I would have loved to have this maybe whenever the previous meeting was. I think it's really important. You know, going back to the equality impact, you know, the EDI report we just had, the mention of the reps and how we eliminate structural barriers to communities being able to do what they need to do. This is an example of where there is a structural barrier, because quite a few of these big organizations that serve community of interest and identity that are not place-based are unable to actually access any funding. And basically we have huge barricades and things where people that do fantastic work in the city we cannot support. I'm really glad that you've clarified the fact that it doesn't have to be you know, an asset that needs to be invested in. But I can find you the training that was delivered to me in 2019. I have the notebooks where it was very clear that that was the case. So I was elected in 2019 and I was told SIL can only be used for infrastructure. So I have my notes, I'll bring them, you can have a copy of that. So I think part of this needs to be training for members after the election or when something is ready, when this is sorted, to ensure that all members, including people who have been around 30 years, understand what SIL is. Because I think there is a real lack of understanding of this. And it's really, really important. I am disappointed that we are not able to start a fund now, because I think we could have pushed this and had that done. I do not agree with taking the words out, because where would the money come from? We need to make a commitment to having a pot. There is no point saying the beginning of that sentence without the end, in my opinion, and we need to be brave and just do it to eliminate structural barriers to community of interest having somewhere to get funding.
Thank you very much. Councillor Crosthorne, please.
Thank you, Chair. As Councillor Smith mentioned when introducing the amendment, there is a lot in here that we agree with. I particularly agree with some of the changes around governance. I think Councillor Argenzio touched on the fact that there's a lot of confusion around SIL and Section 106 and ward pots and how wards can use them effectively. So I do agree with clarifying that. I do also understand the problem being described that communities of interest or identity might miss the current criteria. What I am uncertain about, though, is that we have exhausted all other sources of funding for this. Other authorities have used strategic SIL for items like this, so I think we're kind of putting the cart before the horse a little bit with presuming that this requires a top slice of neighbourhood SIL when Brent Council, for example, have used strategic SIL for something similar.
Councillor Naz, please.
Thank you very much, Tom. I welcome a lot what's in this report, especially around the review. I agree with Angela's points about the confusion about what SIL is and what we can use it for, because I agree with her. We were told that it can only be used for infrastructure. But my point is many smaller voluntary and community organisations really struggle to access funding streams, and we've had this discussion before, Tom. What I'd really like to see is what steps will the council take to ensure neighbourhood SIL is accessible to grassroots community groups that do lots of great work in our communities, you know, lots of volunteering, doing fantastic work, which we see on a daily basis. But because they're not larger organisations and they don't have the capacity to apply, a lot of the times they miss out. And my second question is about equity, actually, between neighbourhoods. So areas that experience greater deprivation often have less development, and that sometimes means less SIL funding generated locally. So how will the council ensure the system does not unintentionally widen inequalities between neighbourhoods?
Thank you. I'm going to suggest we keep going and take a range of questions and then come back to Tom. So Councillor Belbin, followed by Councillor Hurst.
Thank you. I mean, just responding to Councillor Nazar, I think the way we do it is through the distribution using the index of multiple deprivation, and that's how we make sure that the neighbourhood SIL goes where it is most needed, not necessarily where it was generated. I really wanted to speak against this amendment, though. I think we have to remember that a lot of this work has come from the petition that was brought 2 years ago by the BEMA 5 group, particularly around these non-geographic communities. And frankly, accepting that amendment, we may as well be back 2 years ago, because we have had this conversation over 2 years of where will funding come from. We've had discussions about whether strategic SIL can be used in that way in Sheffield, and I think we have heard had it explained really, really clearly why our strategic still is completely tied up with other infrastructure demands, and this is where we have come to. So I think taking out the bit that talks about top slicing neighbourhood still just takes us backwards 2 years, and I think it doesn't help at all with the groups who brought this to us in the first place. So I absolutely oppose the amendment. The other point, I think other points have been made by other people. I won't make them again. But I suppose what I would say is, just in response to Councillor Orgenzio, is I do appreciate it would be great to be further on with this. I think partly it's because we've been having the discussion for a long time, and now that we have got to a stage, I do think there's a lot more we need to focus on in terms of governance. So let's put it in place, but let's make sure we get it right, we get the governance right, and we get the criteria right for people who can apply, so it meets the purpose that we actually want it to meet, or we're in danger slightly of just rushing ahead with something without being clear that it is going to meet the needs that we are setting out to do.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hurst, please.
Thank you, yes. Neighbourhood SIL monies are a really valued source of funding for communities across the city. It's clean money, so it can be matched, and it's able to support a wide range of activity and investment. I appreciate that a non-geographical SIL levy would give equally important and valuable opportunities, but I wouldn't and I couldn't support this at the expense of a top slice on the neighbourhood SIL. I and my colleagues in Richmond Ward have used SIL to good effect in community capacity development, engagement, infrastructure projects, and for support for benefits and welfare and advice projects, as well as feasibility studies. And some of those activities should have been conceivably supported by a central strategic pot. And I've asked across the years just how the central 8% is allocated and how local organisations can connect into that and make bids as other local authorities do spend that money, the strategic money, locally. One example of this is work that we've done to improve accessibility and safety in a park. We would have very much welcomed a contribution to that. But I've never managed to get an officer to talk to me about how to unlock or access that central pot, and yet officers will very often make promises, oh, take this building on and you can use some local neighbourhood SIL monies to renovate that. And so I welcome this review. What I don't welcome is an assumption that that the monies that are allocated to a non-geographical SIL should automatically be top sliced from the neighbourhood monies. It becomes more important in marginal communities as a small amount of clean money. I think we're going to get about £7,000 it's anticipated next year in Richmond. And that's not a lot, but when you can match it, it does become an awful lot. So, you know, let's do some more work on this. Let's not assume it's got to be the neighbourhood SIL monies that go. Why can't it be the central admin pot? Cannot the administration be made simpler? I support the idea, I just don't support the source of the money.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Johnson, please.
Thank you. Yeah, this is like drawing teeth. I welcome the progress that's being made. It's just, I agree, it's not going fast enough. But we are where we are, aren't we? Of course, my starting point is I'm in City Ward. So City Ward gets all the applications, requests for money from people who might be, you know, citywide, or even regional or national organisations that just have an office in the city centre, and really have nothing to do with the residents of the ward as such. So we've been saying for years we need to have some way of funding those citywide organisations. So we're moving very, very slowly in that direction. Emphasis on slowly, but you know, there we are. The reason we're saying this is just, we need to have some way of funding, because at the moment the council simply has no mechanism for funding, well-deserving organisations, got something to offer the city, and, can really do something. We just don't have that. So it needn't just be infrastructure we're talking about here. We don't have it for, we're developing those cultural issues, but we just don't have that central pot, given the sort of very much weakened voluntary sector support pots that we do have. I just want to give a good, I'm supporting this, it's moving forward in a direction anyway. I just want to give the example of the Archer project. So it's obviously a citywide organisation, but it's one in our ward, and in particular it's one that, as council, we work with quite a lot, because they do an invaluable service about supporting people who are rough sleeping, might be otherwise be begging, and it therefore has a demonstrable effect on the many people who live and work in the city centre. The Archer project does some great work. But I wanted to draw attention because it's a good example of leveraging in other sources of funding. So we've recently agreed to given them some of the SIL that we've been saving up from our ward pot, because the timing of it means that they can then leverage in a lot of goodwill, in-kind contributions from a range of businesses across the board if we just have this money now to unlock the next step of their rebuilding project, and that will really help their projects in the long run. So we're happy to support that. But it's just an example of this could have been done years ago had we had this approach towards supporting those bigger institutional organisations like that. The point about strategic SIL is in terms of our structure, we have the infrastructure delivery plan that already sets out in it that we can spend that strategic SIL on community facilities. It's not well highlighted in there, but it is in there. We could organisationally agree to do that, but it's just that we never have so far. So what I'd like to hear is that we have a proposal coming forward as the next step of the bit of work, saying how we're going to do that. But of course, I talked at remember the last time this came to this committee, I talked about kicking the can down the road, and now we get the chance to kick the can again. I don't want it to be delayed any further, so I'm happy to support the proposal to set up something out of a slice of the neighbourhood SIL to get that fund established, but I would be looking to ensure that that is filled later on with something out of the strategic SIL, because that spending in local communities, like Councillor Hurst has described, is really important. So we need to have that, that structurally put in place as soon as possible. Progress is what it is. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Miskell, followed by Councillor Otton.
Thanks very much, Chair. Very much support the proposal, and I guess where it comes from, people have talked about the fact that this has come from residents of our city who together have come together and have said that we should be supporting communities much better. And this proposal comes from that, from listening, from changing to bringing forward proposals that are different and better for communities. I did listen to Councillor Crosthorne's suggestion about how his group supports the proposal, but wants to create a fund, but doesn't necessarily yet know where it's going to fund it from. I think he mentioned one thing which was quite interesting, that he wants to fund it from the strategic element of SIL. Now, I guess we've probably got to be clear, haven't we, that if we were to do that, and even if that was permissible to do so, that would mean as we were building more homes and more employment sites in our city, it would mean fewer changes to roads to tackle congestion, fewer bus stops and fewer local facilities. And I don't think that that would be a wise thing to do. I think it'd be quite a dangerous thing to do in a growing city, and certainly not a mature step to do. I think it was also quite interesting what Councillor Johnson said about being a city ward council and the applications that he and his colleagues receive from organisations that of course are based in the city centre but provide services right across our city. Two of those spring to mind for me. I guess one of them is Say It, that's based in the city centre but provides support for LGBT people right across Sheffield and does an absolutely amazing job. I think another is probably the Association for Ukrainians in Great Britain, which I think is really interesting. You know, many people will know that they run a weekend school for Ukrainian young people. I think it's based in Bramall Lane in City Ward, Of course, they could apply to that fund in the city centre, but I don't think that would be the appropriate way to support that community that is spread right across our city. And we do need to make sure that we support that organisation and support organisations like them throughout our city. So very much welcome and support this proposal.
Thank you very much. And then Councillor Otton.
Thank you, Chair. I've got to say, I find myself largely agreeing with Councillor Johnson, despite him arguing against our proposal. Look, I think it's absolutely right that there are a great many projects that a fund like this could be spent on, and we're talking about a fairly small fraction of a fairly small fund, and we've got this ambition that it's going to do all these wonderful things. It's really not going to go very far, is it, for what we're proposing? So I think we're tying ourselves slightly in knots, aren't we? And in terms of, look, we have lots of calls on the money of the resources of this council, and arguing of exactly which pot everything comes out of is not always the most dignified way of having this conversation. The problem with the neighbourhood SIL, as far as this body is concerned, is that it's controlled by somebody else. It's controlled by local members in their communities, supporting their communities. And it's always easier to see money controlled by somebody else as kind of free money that we can take control of and spend on their behalf. And that's not a good instinct for anybody to have. I do think we're skating on thin ice, therefore, both legally and morally with this. The advice, the legal implications on page 2056, they talk about addressing the demands that development places on an area. And, you know, obviously, Curtis has just said that strategic skill can be used for things like community centres, as is used in other authorities. Community centres count as infrastructure. That's the Part A purposes that all still can be used for. Demands that development places on an area, we're not even talking about doing that now, are we? We're talking about citywide. Is that really the right thing to do? Let's remember, this council, we are talking about, in our local plan, building many, many hundreds of homes in the north and in the southeast, proposals that are not popular with those communities. And we're not even saying to them, look, you can have at least your SIL from that, 15% the neighbourhood SIL, you're not even getting that, it's all getting shared out. But even that little bit you will get left out to actually deal with demands development is placing on those areas, which is what the SIL is for. We're going to slice that off you again. I think that is a mistake for this council to be doing that to people who are very unhappy with the proposals for development in the area that they're getting in the north and in the southeast. So I really think we should. I welcome the review of the governance of SIL. I do think it needs to be actually related to the amount of development that happens in an area. It's something that we've got wrong in that decision in 2018. And I think we need to back off as an authority on hammering some of the neighbourhoods, the geographic neighbourhoods, that we're not intending to deliver what they want in terms of local plan. Therefore, great proposals. I think somewhere like the strategic SIL is somewhere we can go for this. But frankly, it's the same problem, same challenges we face every year with the budget. If something is worth spending the money on, then it has to compete with everything else. And this is no different, is it? It's no different to any of that. To say we can treat it differently, we can go and raid the neighbourhoods because it's different, it's not different. So I suggest we do pass our amendment. I hope this still goes ahead. I think there is the general fund and there is the strategic SIL that are both perfectly good sources of revenue for a fund such as this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you, Chair. Look, there's a lot in here that we all agree on. So I think we need to focus on that to begin with. I also, however, agree completely with what Councillor Hurst said. I have to also mention it's the first time I've ever heard a councillor saying, as Councillor Johnson did, he wants to support this proposal and then come back and change it very soon. And make your mind up, frankly. We support these groups. It's where the source of funding comes from. So the amount of money that we're talking about is a lot for neighbourhoods that have already get a small proportion of the SIL. And we need to ensure that this number that we're talking about, it's a tiny, tiny fraction of the city's budget. The back of my fact packet says it's less than 0.01% of the budget. So could you explain what other sources of funding you've looked at other than this? Surely there must be some money elsewhere for this. Surely. Thank you.
Okay, right. Lots of comments, lots of feedback, lots of views, some of which I think answer some of the points that have already been made. So well done, everybody. But I will ask Tom to respond to a number of the points. I know some of this, the questions around strategic sale are linked to the local plan. We have had lots of conversations about this. This is well understood. So there are officers who are much more closely connected to the working of the local plan examination. Kate Martin will. I will perhaps ask Kate to comment on that strategic sale point. But Tom, on some of these questions, do you want to come through? And then I will pick up a few more points as well myself.
Thank you all. So, where best to start? I guess one very quick thing in terms of the nature of strategic SIL and neighbourhood SIL, they are fundamentally different things. So strategic SIL is infrastructure. So the definition in terms of what you can use it for is infrastructure. So when I talked about the flexibility in neighbourhood SIL and being able to use it for other things, like feasibility studies and things like that, that's the flexibility you get from neighbourhood SIL. You do not have that flexibility in strategic SIL. It is infrastructure specifically, and it's defined as such. And it is linked to the local plan, as we said. I think we've previously talked about that fund, and we've previously agreed in this committee that some work will be done on looking at how the infrastructure delivery plan is actually put together, so there is more transparency in that space. But in reality, it doesn't change what you can actually spend it on. In the end of the day, it's still strategic versus neighbourhood. The neighbourhood has a flexibility around it, the strategic does not. I mean, in terms of looking at other sources of funding, this was very specifically a review of SIL, being frank. We weren't asked to look at whether there were, we could come with a budget proposal to the council. We could, obviously bring forward a budget proposal to the council, but that would be predicated on us finding money from other parts, other things, wouldn't it? Other things that we do. So we haven't looked at other funds because this was specifically a review of neighbourhood. So I'm not sure there's anything else much to pick up there, Chair, in terms of answering questions.
That's fine. I don't know whether Kate on strategic still, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, thank you. Just to confirm the points that Tom's shared, strategic SIL is applied through the planning process. It's set down in national guidance in terms of how strategic SIL can be applied. It's used as a levy based on developments across the city. It's collected by the council, and it is used for major infrastructure programmes such as roads, highways, infrastructure, flood management, infrastructure for utilities, energy, power, key infrastructure that a city needs to help it develop and grow. Thanks.
Sorry, Councillor Hudson.
Thank you. I just want to challenge this particular point. So on page 205, the bottom of the report, it talks about strategic SIL and the infrastructure, some examples of the type of infrastructure it can be spent on. Now, we're saying that infrastructure can also include things like community centres, which would come under the scope of this proposal, and that other authorities have also done that. Yeah. So we think that's possible. Then on the top of page 206, you talk about neighbourhood SIL, and you say this can be spent on anything that strategic SIL can be spent on, plus it can be spent on anything else concerned with addressing the demands that development places on an area. Surely, in order to do that, it has to be spent in and around that area, doesn't it?
Councillor Ryan, I think we're talking about separate things here. What's being proposed is to create a different use of neighbourhood SIL. What is in there is correct, and the proposal is to look at the possibility of a top slice of that to support communities that are not geographic based. We have had quite a lot of conversations around this, and I appreciate you've not been in all of them, but that's what's being proposed. So what's in the report is absolutely fine. We can rake over it, but on recommendation B and A, that is talking about there is further work to do. It would be great. It would be great to have your involvement in that further work to make sure that what comes forward is designed that meets the needs of all of our communities. I don't know whether David has anything you want to say.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was just going to come in on the point of area. For the purposes of Sheffield, the relevant area is the whole of Sheffield that doesn't have a parish or a local neighbourhood development plan, because that is the area for which neighbourhood still applies to.
Great. So look, I think there have been many conversations over the last couple of years. It is over 2 years since the petition was brought to full council. Whatever people think about the merits of the recommendations before us, I don't think anyone here is saying that we should not find a way to move this forward. It has been too long. The call was to create a fund that supports communities that are not geographic-based, communities of interest, communities of identity. This is what it's setting out to do. There is a lot of agreement around this committee that governance of SIL needs to be looked at. That is what is being looked at here. And there is, I think, consensus that we need to find a way to continue to move this forward. There will be opportunities for all of these points to be looked at. Recommendation B, further work is required to design this fund to put in place the right governance arrangements and criteria for applications. I think we've had a good conversation today. I think people have had the chance to raise lots of points. There is a set of recommendations before us. There is an amendment to one of them. And unless anyone has anything they haven't already said, I would suggest we take that step to look at the recommendations next. Okay, so we don't get many amendments at SNR, but we'll take the amendment first. So, recommendations A, B, C and D are set out on page 195. I will read out the proposed amendment, which is, just to be really clear, for Amendment A. Amendment A currently reads, approve in principle the creation of a non-geographical community infrastructure levy fund specifically for delivering outcomes relating to communities of interest and or identity likely to require the top slicing of the neighbourhood community infrastructure levy. The proposed amendment that has come in from the Liberal Democrat group would amend it to remove the words at the end, likely to require the top slicing of the neighbourhood community infrastructure levy. Okay, is that fair? Happy with that? Okay, great. In which case, we'll have a vote on that proposed amendment from, do we have a proposer? We have a proposer and a seconder, so yes, good. Happy with that? Yes. Great, okay, we'll move to a vote. So, can I see members who are in favour of that proposed amendment? Okay. Can I see members who are against? And I think for clarity, any abstentions? I don't believe there are any. Okay, so that amendment does not carry. We then have the recommendations, which are set out on page 195. Amendment A, as originally set out in the report. Recommendation A, as originally set out. B, agree that further work is required to design this fund. C, ask that officers prepare further information to support a decision at a strategy and resources committee meeting as early as possible in the 2026-27 municipal year. And D, note that the ongoing review of governance processes for neighbourhood SIL will include any changes required to support the above, and a further report will come back if necessary. Are members happy to support that? Is there dissent? Do we need to have a vote on that?
Dissent, that's a Lord Mayor. Dissent, Chair. We're happy to agree recommends B, C and D, but not A.
Okay. Right. Let's have a... Okay, noting that, that's helpful. It's nice to have you kind of doing your chief whip role in SNR. Do we... Well, actually, much sucking of teeth over here. Do we have, is voting in part something we can do on a committee report?
I'm just going to have to check that.
If it helps, I allowed some, we had it on Friday at ASR, we rejected one of the recommendations and agreed the other two, so.
We're just going to pause for 1 second.
It's something that we need to review in the council procedure rules.
No. Okay.
The council procedure rules apply equally to all bodies within the council, and therefore it's at your discretion, Chair, acting in the interests of aiding clarity and transparency.
Okay, all right. Given that it has been set out clearly what the intention is in terms of voting in parts on this one, and that colleagues are saying that this has been done in other policy committees, let's do that. However, I will just note, and I think probably worth minuting, that there are committee chairs here who have not been in this situation and do not have a precedent on their committees of voting in parts, and therefore I do think that there needs to be a firm ruling applied for the new municipal year in order to be really clear about the way forward on this. Okay? There we go. Homework for the pre-election period. Okay, so in which case, can I see, well, Councillor Otton, just for the record then, can you just set out the voting, the way in which your vote should be interpreted, and if that applies to every member of the Liberal Democrat group here today?
Yes, I understand our group is voting against A and for B, C and D. If we had a vote on A and then a vote on the rest, that would probably be the clearest way.
No, there isn't. I think it's clear. But I'm going to take the recommendations as in the usual way with all of them. We'll note your voting in parts. Does anyone else want to say how they're voting other than straightforwardly? Okay, in which case, can I see Councillor for the minutes? Can you just please state that?
Certainly, Chair. I'll be voting along the lines suggested by the Lib Dem group.
Okay, right. In which case, can I see members who are in favour of the recommendations but noting what people have just said about A? Yes, it does. Okay, so those recommendations are all carried, but we note 5 votes against recommendation A. Yeah, recommendation A. Good.
So can I just check, Chair? I'm recording for recommendation A, 8 votes for recommendation A and 5 votes against, and then all the other recommendations passed unanimously.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tom. Item number 11 is free bus pilot scheme, which begins on page 213 in your packs, and we are joined by Will Stewart. Thank you, Will. If you could, for everyone in the room and those watching online, briefly introduce yourself and then briefly introduce the report, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Hi everyone, I'm Will Stewart, Director of Investment, Climate Change and Planning, and I'm here today to talk about the proposal to stand up some work around a free bus pilot for the city. So I think important, Chair, to outline at the beginning what this is and what this isn't. This isn't today a recommendation for proceeding with a free bus pilot. This is a recommendation around charging officers with doing the work with Simca colleagues to then bring a recommendation back to SNR at the first available opportunity following the election to then seek your approval on whether we proceed to stand up that pilot or not. So I think important just to set that out for context for members today. Just very, very briefly, some context. So we know that we're moving towards a franchise model for public transport in the region. There was an announcement earlier, earlier last week actually, about the Mayor's transport strategy and the People's Network. This report has come about as a result of a full council motion on the 4th of February, where the motion at that meeting was for officers to go away and do some development work around what a free transport pilot might look like for the city. And we know there's widespread political support for a pilot for free public transport. In working up this paper, we've been doing some extensive conversation with colleagues in Barnsley. So colleagues around the table will know that Barnsley stood up their MyCard free transport pilot last year. That's been really successful, and there's an opportunity to learn from that pilot as we move forward with our own proposals. And we know that following that pilot in Barnsley, in the first 6 months of that pilot, the authority there recorded over 1 million journeys under the MyCard scheme, so a very popular scheme. What we're proposing is subject to members' approval, to do some development work around a time-limited pilot. So that will run from January to July next year, 2027. The reason for January is that these pilots take a long time to develop. In fact, I think Barnsley's took slightly longer than the 8 or 9 months that we will have to stand up this pilot if members agree. So there's a lot of work to do, and that's really around looking at the potential variations to a pilot, what's in, what's out, including a specific challenge for us here in Sheffield as to whether tram is included in a free transport pilot. So there are implications around cost of including free transport for tram as well as bus. As I've mentioned, I think this really has been a really popular scheme in Barnsley for a number of reasons, and for a number of reasons that members outlined when the motion was presented at full council on the 4th of February. Transport affordability, we know, is a big barrier to some people in our city, particularly in our more deprived communities, and actually improving access to education and training for young people is something that's a key priority. We know that universal or near universal schemes, so blanket free transport pilots, are actually often seen to enjoy higher take-up than those more targeted means-tested schemes. So actually having a blanket approach is something that's been really successful, and there's evidence to back that up on schemes elsewhere. And we know actually that pilots like this can influence travel choices for people, as we move towards an integrated network and as we move towards a widespread free travel offer that will be coming in the autumn, we believe will be coming in the autumn of 2027. So a number of really positive reasons to stand a pilot like this up. The other impacts for us would be, air quality. We also know that the significant number of our trips in the morning and afternoon peaks are around kids and young people being driven to school. So actually a pilot like this could see some modal shift improvements that would support our public transport network in the city, and obviously climate and air quality objectives, which we've set down in various adopted policy throughout the council, including our transport vision and decarbonisation strategies as well. So that's a bit of the context. Some of the key challenges, obviously, and I've outlined a bit in sort of talking about how long this would take to stand up. Clearly, there are funding and financial implications of standing up a pilot like this. Notwithstanding, we do believe that there is an intention from the Mayor or Combined Authority to stand up a free travel pilot across the region from late summer 2027. Obviously, we would be filling a gap up until that point, and there's no guarantee that the Mayor will stand that up, even though that's the indication. There are challenges around logistics. So actually, if this sees a big take-up, a big increase in take-up in school journeys, we'll have to think about what that means in terms of getting kids to and from school, and we need to think about logistics, working with schools, standing up hot buses, as they're known, which are extra demand response buses that cater for additional need. That's what Barnsley had to do, that's what we will have to do. And then there are commercial arrangements around contract management. me now? Yes. Great. So commercial arrangements to be stood up with operators. There are issues around data sharing, obviously GDPR. You know, the My Card in Barnsley has the ability to track journeys for young people that will need to be worked through with our young people in our schools to make sure that people's personal information is safeguarded. And then, of course, expectation and reputational management. So if we stand up a pilot and then don't deliver a really high-quality scheme, you know, we will see some of the impact from our communities there, I think, in terms of, you know, their expectations. So what do we need to do in the coming weeks before we come back to S&R at the first available opportunity? Well, we need to confirm the scope and eligibility. So that's talking about age ranges, the geography that we're going to include, cross-boundary journeys, services, modes, hours of operation, etc., and that tram point that I made earlier. We need to set a budget envelope. We do have some indicative numbers, but I would really stress at the moment that these are very indicative, and we want to take the next few weeks to work with Simca to really drill down on what this is going to cost the organisation. We'll be bringing that back to you at the appropriate point. We need to look at what the commercial and legal arrangements with those operators might be over the coming weeks as well. And make sure that we've got the operational delivery really nailed down. So who is going to issue the passes if we do a pass system, you know, making sure that we get that widespread comms engagement with our schools, engagement with our communities and young people as well. So all of that work to do. So that's the intention over the next couple of months, is for us to stand up that work and then come back for a decision on whether to proceed or not at the first available S&R following the elections. That's probably enough from me, Chair, but more than happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So a number of members have already indicated. I saw Councillor Miskell first. I've got Councillor Argencio. Take those first two. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chair. And I guess it's probably important, isn't it, to thank officers from City Transport, but also finance colleagues for working through this piece of work that did, of course, come from a full council motion that we agreed together in this place. It also comes at a really good time, doesn't it? A really positive time when last week we know that South Yorkshire's Mayor Oliver Coppard launched that South Yorkshire's People's Network. Many of us can remember what time was like, or the time was like, when we had a bus system that worked in our city and public transport worked for people, and we'll be going back to that time in September of next year when we launch bus franchising. You know, for me, I think this is really interesting, and Will has talked about Barnsley an awful lot in his introduction to this, and the report alludes to it. But from talking to colleagues in Barnsley, I'm particularly impressed by the fact that we've seen over 1 million free bus journeys in the short period of time that that's been in operation in Barnsley. And I'm really, really interested in some of the things that Will says there. What a wonderful problem that would be if we as a city, as a region, had to put on hot buses, effectively, to increase the number of services that were available for young people to be able to catch that bus to go to school, so that families didn't have to jump in the car, didn't have to do all those sorts of things, didn't have to take that financial hit to do so in order to be able to take their kids to school. It would be absolutely brilliant. And I think one of the other things that I see about Barnsley that's really interesting is that 63% of all boardings, so when people get on a bus, took place in Barnsley's 3 most economically deprived neighbourhoods. And that really does show that this sort of approach does open up opportunities for young people, and particularly benefits people like young people in my ward in Park and Arbourthorne as well. So very much welcome it, and I think it's the right approach to be taking. It leaves us kind of 6 or 7 months prior to bus franchising to be trying this out in our city, to be making sure that young people in Sheffield have access to it, just like people in Barnsley do as well. And it's the right thing to do for young people in the city.
Thank you very much. Councillor Argencio, please.
All sounds really good, doesn't it? Free travel for young people. I just wonder why we would do a pilot before. I mean, the Mayor just yesterday in the Integrated Care Partnership said that they are going to do a South Yorkshire-wide under 18s. So why would we commit millions of pounds of our reserves to a pilot for something that's going to happen anyway a few months later? I personally would like a pilot in the first year of that coming into force for the under 18 for free travel for under 22. So we top it up. So if we are spending reserve, why don't we top it out and then we do a study on how that affects and, what statistics will tell us and the data will tell us, because 1 in 3 people in Sheffield doesn't actually have access to a car. So I don't think, from Barnsley, and Will, you said this in the briefing, anecdotally, we know that lots of travel take up for the My Card in Barnsley was coming from most deprived areas. That is because lots of those people probably don't have access to a car. So I do not believe that, it's probably going to make a difference if we did it in Sheffield to kids being driven to school, to be honest, because lots of kids don't have that option because their parents just don't have a car. So those kids will still be on the bus or will walk to school. But also, so it's like, why are we doing this now? Why are we, I'm not against the data being brought to us, but I've seen the numbers and I did like a back of an envelope of what it meant in terms of if we did, you gave us some numbers, I'm jotting notes, and then how much was going to cost for 7 months, and if we did it, long term. And you do say in the report that, if you put something in place as a pilot, then people expect it. But if we did a pilot when the under 18 comes into place for just 1 year, and we make it really clear. And also, I would also advocate to arguing with Simca to get rid of the 9 p.m. Cut off, because it won't impact too much on the cost because the younger children won't use it, but the older children, they may go to a sport club, to a party at a friend's house, or just meet up with friends. The 16, the 17, the 18-year-old will have that freedom to be together at that bus stop and, wait together and go home together, etc., whilst, they get cut out at 9 p.m. So, I don't disagree with having the report coming back to us, but I just wonder why we're doing it here. Is it just because PERP starts on Friday?
Councillor Costello.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's good that we're starting work on this. There was the council motion that I think was unanimous. I think every councillor voted to start the work on this. And then after that council motion, we did have our budget meeting in March, where it's worth saying that the Labour group didn't actually propose any funding for this, possibly because full council voted for more work to be done to see where this could be funded from. And so I do question why we're receiving a report today when full council already agreed to push through work to look at this. It seems like a bit of a waste of time to spend all the time writing this report when we agreed it anyway. It's just a bit odd. And following on what Councillor Argentio said at the end, maybe it's because there's an election coming up. Who knows?
Right, let's go to Councillor Melvin and then Councillor Dale, and then we'll come back and address some of these points in a minute.
Thank you. I do feel like the last two contributions were a little bit confused about our process here in the council. We put a motion through asking for officers to start doing some work on this, and when officers bring us a report to show that they are doing what we asked them to do, suddenly that we're going about this the wrong way. So I find them a little bit bizarre, to be honest. And I wanted to respond to some of the points that Councillor Argentio raised, because I think there's lots of point in doing a pilot prior to bringing in the full scheme. I find it bizarre, to be honest, to think that if you look at some of the parking situations around some of the schools in my ward, the idea that people don't drive if they're from deprived areas, I find just bizarre, to be honest, because we've got people parking around all of our schools and causing all sorts of problems, and that's just one of the things that we might be able to address through this pilot. But it's obviously a really positive thing to encourage young people onto public transport as soon as we can and start to really generate those additional journeys before we get to franchising, so that when we have a franchise system, we are much more quickly able to realise the benefits of that system. It's also a massive bonus, frankly, to people who will be suffering through a cost of living crisis that is ongoing. And again, we've referred earlier in the meeting to the global situation and the likely impact on people's pockets of oil prices, etc. So I think it's a fantastic idea to start it as soon as possible. If January is possible, when we're still in winter and people are really feeling that pain in their pockets, then let's get some, this is a great way to actually put more money in people's pockets. But I do think primarily we need to be about encouraging people onto public transport in the first place. Of course, those young people who are 15, 16, you know, many of them will soon be 18 and paying that full fare in the future, which is what we will need to make our franchise, our publicly run bus system and tram system effective in the first place. So I'm really grateful for the work that officers have done to bring this forward so quickly. Yes, it's clear that we still need to work through some of the details, but I think it's really important that we progress it so that we're not getting officers working on doing a lot of work on something that unless it's clear we're going to support it. So I'm really glad that it's in front of us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dale, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm kind of going to reiterate what Councillor Belbin's just said. I do support this pilot for children living in my ward. The sooner the better that we can get our children onto buses and we can get them accessing things in the city centre, sports facilities, recreation activities and school and training. And I do challenge the thought that people in deprived communities don't drive. People in my community do drive. They have to drive because the bus service is so poor for them to be able to go to their low-paid jobs with antisocial hours, that actually they have to drive. So, you know, I think that's a bit of a misconception about people living in some of our communities.
Right, thank you very much. Is there any other members who want to come in? Okay. David, you indicated you want to come in.
I think Kate wants to come in as well, but I'd just make the point that full council didn't resolve to actually take any formal action on this. Full council can't make those decisions where those are within the remits of committees. Full council didn't, just check the resolution, there was nothing about officers doing any work within that resolution. It was merely an ask for TRC to consider adding it to its work programme.
So actually, I'll just add to that last meeting. Do you want me to come on that? Sorry.
Oh, well, I was going to say that it was decided that because of the budgetary implications that TRC its work programme, and therefore at the last meeting of this committee, it decided that it would be added to its work programme and a report brought as soon as possible.
Which everyone supported. Well, I don't know whether there's any points you wanted to come back on, because there were a few technical points, there was a few other points.
Yeah, I mean, maybe to come back on some of the technical points, why a 9 PM cut-off and there's various other, I mean, we can work through that. I think there's a challenge if Sheffield is an outlier in terms of what's being proposed for the rest of the region. So the Barnsley pilot was 9 PM. I take the point on activity happening after that, and it's something we've resolved to look at, but probably I think in conversation with Simca colleagues, they would rather a consistency in the first instance and then an expansion if we need to include longer hours or different geographies and so on. I think on the under-22s, I think the challenge here from a finance perspective is that we know that there's a commitment, as you've outlined, Councillor Argencio, that the Mayoral Combined Authority brings in an under-18 scheme. If we were to go as a local authority, as an outlier, and say we're going to do something around under-22s, that is money that we haven't budgeted for. That's money that we can't really be clear about costing accurately at this time. And actually will set a precedent then for how we move forward in the future as well. I know that you've indicated that you would like to see a one-year pilot, but it does, I think, set expectations that then, you know, if that proves popular or successful, we don't then have an identified budget to be able to fund that from a council perspective. In terms of developing up the scheme, just to be clear, we've done some initial work with Simca colleagues based on their experiences and based on the Barnsley pilot. There will be specific geographical challenges. You know, our scheme will be much bigger than the Barnsley pilot. We envisage many more children taking up our scheme just because of the sheer number of children in Sheffield. And actually, we'll need to do some really clear work with how our bus networks work. Barnsley is a slightly more centralised model. We've got depots that are scattered around the city, as colleagues will know. So there's going to be a lot of kind of technical detail that we'll need to work through. We will start that work to bring back to members a kind of clear recommendation in the summer, but then the real kind of bulk of the work will happen from then onwards as we stand up the scheme before a potential January launch next year. I don't know if I've missed anything. Please do let me know.
I think between different responses, it's covered off most of the points. Was there a follow-up question you wanted to ask, Councillor Agencio?
No, just wanted to, a point of clarification is that we haven't budgeted for a pilot either. So, for under 18s. So it wasn't in our budget. So why would the pilot be okay not being in the budget, but having something extra on top of what Simca is going to bring in anyway be a problem if we make it clear from the beginning there's a one-off and that we're just doing it to basically then argue that we need to do it if the data confirms that it's useful?
I guess I can answer partly from a technical perspective in terms of consistency with other things that might be running and the complications around that. I guess it's probably for others in terms of budget setting to answer the question about, you know, money for an under-18s pilot and then money for a pilot with an extended under-22s provision. I think what I would say, though, is a consistency with the regional approach, and that being very, very clearly about under-18s and us sort of running our pilot on the under-18s principle allows us then to be really definitive that our pilot will come to an end. The financial obligations will finish and they will then be picked up by Simca, albeit, you know, on the basis of we make a transport contribution to Simca through the transport levy, so we are paying in an indirect way. But I think from my perspective, that consistency is a really important point.
Philip, I don't know whether there's anything you wanted to add.
In part of the discussions that we'll inevitably have with Simca will be the implications of the total cost of the scheme and also implications of budget that they've already committed to support the bus network, for example, and whether any of that can be reallocated to support this pilot. So those discussions and negotiations will take place over the course of the next few weeks in order to bring the paper back, which will then set out what the cost to this council would be, and then we would look to allocate a funding source to that once we've established what that cost actually is.
Okay. Final point.
Yeah, just one short one. I think that it's quite difficult to make any sort of coherent decision without any figures at all, and it's not Christmas of this report, it's where we are, but I think it would just be good to have something that explores the costs of under-22s compared with under-18s when the next stage of work is brought back. Appreciate it's difficult, and there might be, I think what members will probably need, whether it's this committee or TRC, is to have a good briefing early on as to what those figures might look like, so there can be some sort of informal steer at least as to where this is going.
Okay, thank you. So we have a set of proposals, recommendations ahead of us, which is set out to page 215. Our members have to support those recommendations. See nods all round? Okay, just for clarity, given that we've had a split vote earlier on, any votes against? No, any abstentions? Okay, that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Right, item number 12, the international update for 25-26. And we are joined by Nick Hamilton. Nick, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your patience. And for the benefit of everyone here, Nick, if you could just introduce yourself and then briefly introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Nick Hamilton, I'm the International Lead here at the Council. Before you, we have the third international update, which gives an overview of all international related activity that the Council has been involved in that we're aware of, and also some of the major things we've done with some of our key partner institutions across the city. The format of the report is such that the initial report just focuses on trying to align things to the international strategy and the key themes that we have within that. And then the appendix itself goes into much greater detail in terms of some of that activity. What you can see is that there is a broad range of activity in terms of civic, cultural, sports, education and business. And we've only been doing this, as I say, it's the third year. You may note that the extent of the activity has increased quite considerably in that time. I think the fact that we now have a specific focus on international is actually starting to reap some benefits. Not necessarily in terms of bringing in income or saving money or anything like that, but in terms of greater activity with partner organisations. In terms of a couple of things just to flag up to you, there's mention of a trade mission planned for May, going to Hong Kong and China. Hopefully we should know later this week in terms of numbers that have signed up for that and whether that is a viable exercise. You'll notice that we had a couple of approaches from the same Chinese city, Yunfu, in terms of partnering with us, twinning, and the fact that we now have this committee approved a partner city policy, that shows that we have a framework in terms of being able to assess these approaches and politely say no. There's a lot of activity detailing the 75th anniversary with the German city of Bochum. Lots and lots of activity took place last year, and indeed the Lord Mayor went out there to sign a reaffirmation of the twinning agreement. She was so impressed herself with Bochum that she's committed to taking her children back in a couple of years' time when one of the developments is actually completed. Other things just to flag up, there's a lot of activity with both universities, which I'm pleased to see, because a lot of our twinning and sister city relationships initially started through education links, particularly Bochum back in the day. There's a lot of regular activity now taking place between academics at both universities and universities in Bochum, and latterly in terms of the Khmelnytsky National University in Ukraine. And it's great that we're actually been able to do some of these activities which aren't costing a huge amount of money, and it's actually some of the restrictions we've got certainly in terms of Ukraine and what we are able to do with the current conflict. Some student, obviously, a lot of student engagement. There's mention of 24 students going to Bochum at the start of this year, and it was really interesting to see some of the projects that they came back with in terms of taking this forward. It wasn't just a jolly, it's actually linked to their academic studies. And in terms of Ukraine, I would just flag up that the mayor and deputy mayor of Khmelnytsky, who addressed full council back in December 22, are planning to actually visit again in June, so that the visit is just being firmed up at this stage. There's mention of the Lord Mayor going out to Hargeisa in Somaliland late last year. In terms of some of the engagement, we're not a partner city and there aren't any plans to actually partner with that city, but we did actually say we would share some experience and knowledge. So our highways team are actually advising them at the moment, just providing a few pointers. They've started to bring in speed limits and traffic lights for the first time. So they want us to learn from our experiences. So hopefully that's a fairly straightforward thing to actually share. I think really I'm conscious of time, so I'll leave it there, and if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take those.
Nick, thanks as always for your work on all international matters in the Council. It is appreciated, and the report sets out very, very clearly some of the really positive activity and outcomes that you and colleagues have been able to achieve, so thank you very much. A couple of members have indicated. I've got Councillor Agencio, followed by Councillor Smith. just so I know. Is there anyone else wanting to comment on this item? Okay, let's take those two. Thank you very much. Councillor Agencio.
Thank you so much, Nick, for the report. And I think it does make a difference having someone who leads on this. And, you know, you can see from the number of activities and, you know, there's like a rationale to it. So it feels really positive. Yeah, there's, you know, the links with both university in Sheffield is really promising, and some of the very kind of geeky things, I would say, that they are interested in is, you know, it's fantastic. You know, I jokingly say, if you want any contacts with any Italian place, just you know where to go. Joking aside, you do know that, you know, I've expressed my concerns in terms of the kind of contact with China, in particular because we regularly get asked questions in full council meetings about the relationships that we already have. So you've said it in briefing, but would like you to clarify again how we're ensuring that any kind of arrangement, engagement that we have with other countries are also kind of in tune with our, you know, aims in city goals in terms of, you know, human rights and, you know, being welcoming, etc. Also, obviously, any diplomatic relation is welcome, and talking to people and opening our minds to other places is super important. It's something I really support. But because we regularly get questions about China in particular, but also what are we doing in terms of the council relationship with Nablus and how are we developing those? I mean, I think everybody got an email today from what the situation is there at the moment, which is not great, to put it mildly.
Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief, Nick. This is an amazing report. Given the amount of funding we have for this, it really is jaw-dropping, the amount of progress. And boosting Sheffield's profile around the rest of the world and offering help to people who are less fortunate than ourselves in some parts of it, it can only be good for the city in terms of raising our profile, potential economic benefit, but I know that's not the main reason we're doing it for. The other thing I just wanted to say was, given current events elsewhere in the world, anything we can do as a city to promote understanding between different countries has just got to be a good thing. So, yeah, keep going. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to come in? No? Okay. Well, look, let me just pick up the point around China, and I'm sure Nick will as well. But I think, as you have alluded to, Councillor Agencio, you know, yes, when concerns are raised, you know, we engage with them, you know, comprehensively. And if there are any concerns that are raised about that are particularly specific in China, then we'll raise them with the relevant authorities. But I do think that we have a significant international presence from China in our universities, many students come to this city every single year. We've just had the biggest and best Lunar New Year celebrations in the city earlier, last month rather. And there are increasing cultural, sporting and economic ties that I think a mission to China will seek to extend and to deepen. And so I think, you know, it is a welcome opportunity. I'm struck yesterday when we were talking about the very good news that snooker is staying in Sheffield until 2045. I don't know if anyone's seen that news. But snooker is staying in Sheffield until at least 2045, and the crucible is being redeveloped with a £45 million investment plan. There's a global TV audience for snooker around the world of at least 500 million. and it is a fast-growing. I was told yesterday there's 300,000 people who played snooker in China, and this year we will welcome back the defending world champion Zhao Jingtong, the first ever Chinese world snooker champion, who I am sure will attract an even bigger global TV audience from China to Sheffield. And we said yesterday that we want to ensure that we are taking Sheffield to the world and bringing the world to Sheffield. And I think everything in the report sets out exactly how we are doing that. And so I welcome the mission that's going to be taking place in May. Nick.
Thank you. I'd just add to that in the sense of we are aware that there are concerns. I'm in the process of doing a risk assessment to actually look at the activity that we get involved in. China itself is basically now the world's second largest economy, and China and Hong Kong combined are the UK's third largest market. And I think estimates suggest that employment-wise, it's around about 330,000 jobs that are actually supported in the UK through activity linked to trade with China and Hong Kong. We're in regular dialogue with the FCDO, so the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, in terms of seeking their advice, and have also actually engaged with the British Embassy in Beijing. We're engaged on a person-to-person basis, and obviously, you know, we are mindful of the fact that we have a significant Chinese population living here in Sheffield. The activities, we're working with the Company of Cutlers, the Simca and the Chamber in terms of assessing what we are going to do when we're out there. And it's been framed in the sense of being a learning journey, because a lot of the activities that are planned from a business perspective will be giving companies the opportunity to see new technology, the application of AI, etc., and some really mind-blowing things that they might not necessarily get the opportunity to see otherwise. For instance, there's talk about visiting a flying car factory on the Friday, which, you know, that's an opportunity that you're not going to get anywhere else at the moment. The other thing as well is in terms of trying to actually reinforce and strengthen some of the links we have with Chengdu, our twin city. We've just celebrated 15 years with them. There is a civic element to that, and I'll be going out there representing the city. It just so happens that it coincides with a Partner Cities Collaboration Conference, I think it is. So I'll be taking part in some of that. Oliver Coppard, South Yorkshire's mayor, will actually be attending a mayor's round table and having some high-level discussions as well. Part of the thinking as well is in the sense of, you know, there are allegations of things that aren't great, but in the sense of if you can try and effect change, you possibly need to have a seat at the table rather than just walking away from them. So it's engagement, but it's measured, and we're continuing to seek advice from relevant bodies, so whether that's UK government, FCDO, DBT, the China Britain Business Council, etc. We're going into this with our eyes open, but we're seeking advice from those who know the market and know how to play things too in terms of what we do. We don't plan to be doing anything to endorse anything where it's, you know, there are particular issues. We'll reserve the right to actually back away and politely decline. And the intention is that the itinerary will be firmed up and agreed before we go, so that things can't be sprung upon us. So hopefully that gives some reassurance in terms of the safeguards. In respect of your second question with regard to Nablus, it's regular dialogue. I've actually got a Teams call tomorrow morning at 9:30 with my contact there at Nablus Municipality. It's been quite challenging in terms of the situation on the ground, full stop. But in terms of some of the demands they have, they're going through council elections in May, I believe it is, and the mayor changes, and it's an all-out election. So some of the things that we've talked about and tried to actually implement when I brought the report last year, that was the current mayor's suggestion. And Abed, my contact in the municipality, said we need to park that, because depending on who comes in, they might just completely change the ideas in terms of what they want to do. But notwithstanding that, it's a case of we are having regular dialogue in terms of just checking in. And I think it's key that we need to have an idea of requirements from people on the ground there, because there have been a number of suggestions here in Sheffield in terms of, oh, you should be doing that and you must do that. But the dialogue has very much been about, it's the individuals that work in the municipality, it's the residents that we're working with, so we need to see what they want. I mean, clearly that doesn't stop any activity taking place with existing organisations based in Sheffield and the connections they already have with NABLUS. But in terms of a council-to-council perspective, we've just got to, you know, rely on the, you know, the elections taking place and then the mayor turning around and saying, yes, I want to continue. My contact out there was saying he doesn't actually know whether he'll have a job after the elections. He's been there 21 years, so the chances are he probably will do. But even so, we've got that as well. So we've got a good working relationship, and hopefully that will continue going forward.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. So, recommendations are on page 229, that we're recommended to note the contents of the report and the activities included at Appendix A. Note that activities have taken place during 2025 to mark the 75th anniversary of Sheffield twinning with the German city of Bochum, and note the progress made towards delivering some of the key themes contained within the international strategy. And I'm just happy to support those recommendations. Agreed. Great, thank you very much indeed. That brings us to the conclusion of our meeting, the final SNR of the municipal year. Thank you all very much indeed. And can I just say thank you very much for his service to Sheffield City Council, to Mike Jackson, who's been the interim Chief Operating Officer for the last 6 months or so. Mike's been a real pleasure working with you. Thank you for all the work you've done. This isn't your final day, but this is your last final SNR, so thank you very much for being with us during this time.